woman kicked out of luxury resort 5 minutes later, she shocked everyone. A black woman at 52. She stood dignified, unshaken, though the white manager wrenched her black card away and cast her out as if her very presence were a crime. The lobby hushed, and in that silence, every witness felt the echo. Dignity denied can rise again, taller, louder, unstoppable. It began with a silence so sharp it cut through the marble air. A pause, a stare, then a sentence hurled like a verdict. This place isn't for you. The words did not belong to a stranger. They carried the voice of a nation that had whispered them for generations. Guests shifted uneasily, unsure if they had heard correctly. A black woman stood at the center of the lobby, plain clothes clinging to her like evidence, her presence questioned before her name was even spoken. Eyes lingered too long. Suspicion traveled like smoke, and phones rose quietly, recording what felt both ordinary and unthinkable. Was this just another humiliation? One more scene in the endless reel of prejudice? Or was it the moment when the story cracked open, when the one dismissed would reveal she held the keys all along? The morning sun spilled through the glass facade of the Carter Resort at Laguna Beach, painting the marble floor in gold and shadow. Everything about the lobby whispered wealth, velvet chairs, crystal chandeliers, the faint clink of champagne glasses as guests settled into their new paradise. And then Ebony Carter walked in. She wore a plain black dress, loose at the seams, sandals worn soft from years of use. No designer handbag dangled from her arm. No diamonds glittered at her wrist. She carried herself with a quiet confidence. But to the eyes waiting inside that lobby, her presence was a rupture. Heads turned, not in welcome, in judgment. A man in a seersucker blazer squinted over his newspaper and muttered to his wife, "Staff entrance is through the back." His wife glanced once at Ebony Sandals, then laughed softly. The kind of laugh that says, "We already know what you are." Two young women in wide-brimmed hats lowered their sunglasses and smirked, nudging each other as if Ebony were a spectacle provided for their entertainment. A group of businessmen near the bar exchanged looks that needed no words. She doesn't belong here. Even the silence of those who said nothing was heavy, complicit, as though her very footsteps across the marble were an intrusion. Ebony felt the eyes, but she did not flinch. She had been under those eyes before at 9 years old, standing barefoot in another hotel lobby while her mother scrubbed the tiles, and a white owner declared they would never be more than cleaners. The memory lingered like a scar, invisible but permanent. Now, decades later, the same eyes followed her, only sharper for being multiplied. She approached the desk. Behind it stood Silas Vance, the new manager, his suit crisp, his posture rigid with the entitlement of someone who had never once been doubted for belonging. His gaze traveled over her from head to toe, stopping at her plain dress, at her brown skin, then finally at her eyes. He didn't smile. "Name?" he asked. The word flat, as if he were asking for an explanation rather than a reservation. "Carter," Ebony said evenly. "Reservation in the presidential suite." The word hung there, presidential suite, and immediately the air shifted. A woman at the bar raised her brows. Someone scoffed. One man chuckled audibly, shaking his head. The disbelief was contagious. You could see it ripple through the lobby like a silent wave. Silas tilted his head, feigning confusion. "Are you certain this is the right hotel? That's a very high-tier room." He said it loud enough for others to hear. Guests leaned closer, thirsty for spectacle. A young couple near the window raised their phones, recording discreetly. Ebony laid her ID and credit card on the counter. "I'm certain." Silas picked up the card with 2 fingers, holding it as though it might smudge him. His lips curled. "Strange," he murmured. "Looks suspicious." Behind him, a clerk shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing. The silence of staff trained to follow, not question, was its own form of violence. From the far side of the room, a guest in pearls whispered to her friend, "Trying to scam her way in. Happens all the time." Her friend nodded, satisfaction already blooming in her smile. Ebony heard it all. She always did. The weight of those eyes pressed on her shoulders, the laughter disguised as whispers slicing sharper than any blade. To them, she was already guilty of trespassing, of daring, of existing in their space. Silas tapped a button on the desk. His voice carried, smooth but cutting. Security. Possible fraudulent guest attempting access to a premium suite. The words fell like stones. Fraudulent. Possible criminal. Guest straightened, leaning in as if watching a show unfold. A man in the corner whispered to his daughter, "See, you can't just let anyone in." Ebony stood still. Her face gave nothing. But her silence was not weakness. It was patience. The kind of patience sharpened over years of humiliation. She reached slowly for her phone, her fingers steady. For a moment the lobby seemed to hold its breath, unsure what would happen next. Silas smirked, certain of his stage. The guests watched, eyes gleaming with the comfort of prejudice confirmed. To them, this was entertainment, a woman exposed, caught, reminded of her place. But the truth of who Ebony Carter was had not yet arrived, and when it did, the entire room would learn that the woman they had just dismissed, just mocked, just condemned with their silence, was not a trespasser at all. She was the owner, and their judgment would become her evidence. The first time Ebony Carter set foot in a luxury hotel, she was 9 years old. Not as a guest, not even as a child welcome to linger in the lobby. She was there because her mother cleaned rooms. Her memory of that morning was sharper than any photograph. The air reeked of bleach and polish. Chandeliers glittered above like frozen stars. Ebony clutched the handle of a mop bucket, her small hands damp with soap. She wanted to look up, to marvel at the glass and the marble, but a white woman in pearls, owner of the resort, swept past, her perfume sharp and her voice sharper. "Children don't belong here," the woman said, her eyes piercing Ebony's mother, then dropping to Ebony. "And you, your family, will never rise above cleaning. This is all you'll ever be." "Yes, I have." The word struck harder than a slap. Guests in the lobby chuckled softly, some shaking their heads with smug approval. One man even muttered, "Exactly right." Ebony felt their eyes not just dismissing her, but condemning her existence, as if being a black child in that space was already a violation. Her mother's shoulders folded inward. She whispered, "Let's keep working." But Ebony's small chest burned. She stared at the marble under her feet, and a vow bloomed in silence. "One day, I will come back to lobbies like this, but not as a cleaner, not as a guest they tolerate, as someone they cannot ignore." That vow carried her through years of scarcity. At school in Jacksonville, Florida, Ebony's clothes came from charity bins, her notebooks half used by other children. Teachers praised her intelligence, but told her to be realistic, because girls like you don't often make it far. She learned early that poverty was a cage, but race was the lock. Store clerks followed her down aisles. Police cars slowed when she walked home at dusk. At every turn, the message was the same: you do not belong. But Ebony fought back with paper and ink. She wrote essays late at night under the dim bulb of their kitchen, stories about dignity, about the right to be seen. She poured her fire into scholarship applications. When a letter finally arrived awarding her a place in a top program for hospitality and tourism, her mother cried not just from pride, but relief that her daughter might escape the same bleach-soaked fate. College was no salvation. In lecture halls, Ebony was often the only black woman. Professors mistook her for janitorial staff. Classmates whispered diversity hire behind her back. When she entered five-star hotels for training, guests assumed she was housekeeping. Even when she spoke fluent English, some managers slowed their words, patronizing as though her skin dulled her intellect. She didn't answer their contempt with anger. She answered it with work. She pressed linens until her fingers blistered. She carried trays heavier than her own frame. She learned every position in a hotel, not just the tasks, but the hierarchy of humiliation. She watched black maids demoted for speaking up, Latino bellboys reassigned for bad attitude, Asian cooks mocked for their accents. And when those workers were punished, they were often sent to rehabilitation units, laundry basements, back kitchens under the guise of correcting professionalism. It wasn't correction, it was degradation. Ebony stored those memories like evidence. Every insult, every sneer, every so-called protocol became part of a case she was silently building against the world that told her she was less. Step by step, she climbed. From front desk clerk to assistant manager, from regional supervisor to executive. Each title came slower than it should have, earned with twice the effort and half the recognition. When she walked into boardrooms, white executives looked past her, speaking as though she were invisible. When she introduced herself as a manager, guests rolled their eyes, some demanding someone in charge. More than once she was told, "You're lucky to be here." But Ebony knew it wasn't luck. It was nights with no food. It was years of silence turned into steel. It was every pair of eyes that had ever told her she didn't belong, fueling her to carve out a place that no one could deny. 2 decades later, she opened her first Carter resort. The headlines called it an overnight success, but Ebony laughed at the phrase. Nothing about her journey was overnight. It was built minute by minute, indignity by indignity, transformed into resolve. Now, her empire stretched across America's coastlines from Miami's heat to Malibu's glow. Guests strolled beneath chandeliers that glittered not because of chance, but because Ebony had refused to break. Employees wore uniforms that symbolized dignity, not servitude. Yet even as the world hailed her as a billionaire reformer, Ebony never forgot the weight of those eyes. She could still feel the sting of judgment, the whispers of impostor, the laughter that followed her mother in that Florida lobby. The marble floors and crystal chandeliers had not changed. What changed was the woman who now stood beneath them, no longer a child with a mop bucket, no longer a student with borrowed books. She was the owner. And every guest who once believed people like her could never rise would have to face the truth she had carried all along. We do belong, and we are here to stay. The Carter Resort at Laguna Beach had been open only a few weeks, its name already whispered among California's elite. The lobby shone like a cathedral of wealth, polished marble, crystal chandeliers, velvet armchairs where white linen suits and pearl necklaces lounged as though they owned the view of the Pacific. Into that curated silence walked Ebony Carter. Plain black dress, simple sandals, no designer bag, no obvious badge of wealth. 52 years of lived strength carried her steps, but to the eyes in that lobby she was immediately reduced to a single fact. She was black. The shift was instant. Conversations froze. Champagne glasses hovered midair. A man in a seersucker blazer leaned toward his wife, muttering just loud enough, "Staff should use the service door." She chuckled, glancing at Ebony's sandals. Presidential suite? Not likely. Near the check-in desk, 2 young women in straw hats pulled down their sunglasses and smirked. "Maybe she's lost," one whispered, laughter spilling between them like champagne. By the bar, an older couple frowned, eyes narrowing with suspicion. A man murmured, "They really let anyone walk in here now." His companion sniffed. This is what happens when standards slip. The lobby became a chorus of glances, whispers, muffled laughs. Some didn't speak, but their silence was louder. Averted eyes, stiff shoulders, that particular American disdain carved deep over centuries. You don't belong. Ebony felt it all. She always did, but she kept walking. At the front desk stood Silas Vance, crisp suit, posture rehearsed, eyes scanning her like a problem to be solved. He didn't greet her. He didn't smile. His voice was clipped, managerial, designed for an audience. "Vain. Reservation under Carter," Ebony replied evenly. "Presidential suite." The words detonated across the room. Gasps, chuckles, murmurs. "Carter, please." Someone scoffed. "She's bluffing," muttered another. "Trying to scam her way up," a man said, already raising his phone to film. Silas's lips curved into a practiced smirk. "Are you sure you booked the right hotel? That's a very high-tier suite." His tone was loud, calculated he wanted the whole lobby to hear. Ebony slid her ID and credit card across the counter, her movements calm, deliberate. Silas picked up the black card with 2 fingers, holding it like something suspect. He turned it toward the light, as though expecting it to confess its falseness. "Strange," he said, his voice rising. "Looks suspicious." From the bar, laughter rippled. "Called it," a guest crowed. "Fraudulent," a woman said under her breath, but loud enough for Ebony to hear. "Security should escort her out now," another added. Silas pressed the intercom button, his words crisp, rehearsed for the stage. "Security to the lobby. Possible fraudulent guest attempting to access premium accommodations." The lobby erupted into whispers, gasps, and hungry stares. Phones tilted higher. For them, it was a show. A black woman caught, exposed, humiliated in real time. Ebony stood still. Her silence was not weakness, but a weapon. Years of watching her mother endure similar humiliation had taught her that silence can sharpen into steel. Elena Smith, the young concierge, shifted nervously at her podium. She remembered seeing Carter in the system that morning, flagged with executive override. But Silas's tone and the heavy gazes of the room froze her throat. Silas leaned closer to Ebony, card still in hand. We've seen this trick before. People come in flashing fancy cards, pretending to belong. Not this time. He handed the card to a clerk. Lock it in the safe until the bank confirms. The clerk hesitated. Sir, policy doesn't. Policy, Silas snapped, is to protect the brand's image, and she doesn't fit it. The safe shut with a cold metallic click. The crowd exhaled as if satisfied, as though justice had been done. Ebony lifted her phone slowly. Her voice, calm and steady, carried across the marble hall. Confirm identity, Ebony Carter. A soft electronic beep followed. The lobby's main screen flickered, then flashed. Owner access, Ebony Carter. Executive override. Silas's keycard light blinked red. Dead. A hush swept the lobby like a tidal wave sucked back before it crashes. The champagne froze. The whispers cut short. For a heartbeat, the entire room stared at the woman they had just condemned, realizing the truth they had refused to see. Elena found her voice. It's true, she said, louder than she thought possible. Mrs. Carter is in the system. Owner level clearance. Gasps. A champagne flute shattered on marble. The two young women yanked off their sunglasses, suddenly pale. The seersucker man blinked hard, muttering, Impossible. Silas blustered. There must be some mistake. Protocol requires. Protocol, Ebony said, her voice firm as iron, is what you used to mask your prejudice. You judged me before you knew me. You decided who I was because of my skin, my clothes, my silence, and every guest here was content to believe you. Her gaze swept the lobby. Heads dropped, guilt-flushed faces pale. A woman near the bar bit her lip, remembering the whisper she had made minutes earlier. You all saw what you wanted to see, Ebony continued. A trespasser, a fraud. But what you saw was only your own bias. Silas's voice cracked. I was protecting this resort. No, Ebony said. You were protecting an image that excludes. That image ends now. She gestured calmly to Elena. Effective immediately, promote her to assistant manager. She had the courage to speak the truth. Elena's eyes widened, stunned. Mrs. Carter, you earned it, Ebony said simply. The silence of the crowd deepened, no longer complicit but ashamed. A gray-haired man near the lounge finally broke it. I thought this country had changed, he said softly. But watching this, it feels like the 60s all over again. Ebony's eyes softened, but her voice stayed resolute. It hasn't changed enough. That's why I don't walk away anymore. She turned back to Silas. Your access is revoked. You will report to the rehabilitation unit. Laundry, kitchens, housekeeping under the authority of those you belittled. If you refuse, you're done here. Silas's jaw trembled. You can't humiliate me like this. You humiliated yourself, Ebony said. You just had an audience. Security moved forward. Silas stiffened, but the weight of dozens of raised phones sealed his silence. He was escorted out beneath the chandeliers he once thought defined him. And Ebony Carter stood at the center, her black dress plain, her sandals worn, her presence undeniable. For every eye that had judged her, she left a truth they could never unsee. The woman they dismissed was not a trespasser. She was the owner, and their silence had become her evidence. The chandeliers of the Laguna Beach resort still glittered, but the lobby no longer belonged to whispers and stares. It belonged to Ebony Carter. Silas Vance was gone, his badge red and useless. Yet Ebony did not linger on his disgrace. He was not the point. The point was every gaze in that room, every silence complicit in her humiliation. This was bigger than a man. This was about a nation. She stepped forward, her plain black dress catching the sunlight pouring through the glass facade. Her voice was steady, deliberate. Today is not about one insult. Today is about history. Too long, black faces have been welcome to clean these halls, but not to lead them. Too long, we have been told to smile at doors that would never open for us. That era ends today here, in this lobby, under these chandeliers. The words hit like thunder. Guests froze. Some swallowed hard. Others shifted in shame. Elena Smith, still standing at the concierge desk, blinked back tears. Ebony lifted her phone. Nia, connect me to the board. Within seconds, her assistant's voice came through. You're live, Mrs. Carter. Board members, Ebony continued, aware that the entire lobby was listening. I am declaring the Carter Resort's equality mandate. Effective immediately, every Carter Resort becomes a sanctuary of dignity. Staff will not only be retrained, they will be reimagined. We will not tolerate symbolic gestures. We will lead. She paused, letting the silence stretch. First, a National Equity Council, composed not only of executives, but of staff housekeepers, bellhops, concierges, chosen by their peers, not their titles. They will shape policy, review complaints, and have the authority to veto management decisions that harm equity. Second, guest equity panels, rotating groups of guests of color, immigrants, disabled travelers, LGBTQ visitors, empowered to audit our service in real time. Their voices will not be surveys filed away, they will be binding. Third, leadership pipelines for Black, Latino, and Asian staff. No longer will frontline workers spend decades cleaning rooms without ever being considered for management. We will fund scholarships, leadership training, and direct mentorship to place them where they belong at the table of power. Fourth, public accountability. All bias complaints and their resolutions will be published quarterly. No more shadows, no more silence. The lobby was no longer silent, it was electric. Phones rose, flashes blinked, live stream comments poured. She's changing the industry in real time. History happening. Finally, someone said it. Ebony did not waver. For decades, she continued, people of color have been told to wait, to be patient, to smile while being judged. That patience is over. Carter Resorts will not be another company that issues apologies while doing nothing. We will be the standard. And if that makes some uncomfortable, then good. Progress is never comfortable. The older man in the lounge who earlier whispered about Birmingham raised his voice now. This feels like Selma all over again, he said. Only this time, we're in a hotel lobby instead of a bridge. Ebony met his gaze, firm and calm. Justice doesn't need a bridge. Justice needs a decision. And today, we decide. Applause erupted not all at once, but in waves. First Elena, her hands trembling. Then Jacob Reed, live streaming, tears in his eyes. Then a woman in pearls who had whispered scammer moments before, now clapping as if to bury her shame. Soon the sound grew louder, echoing through marble and glass until even those who had doubted could not ignore it. That night, news networks across the country broadcast the scene. The clip of Ebony's words, too long, black faces have been welcome to clean these halls, but not to lead them, played on loop. Editorials called it the Carter Doctrine. Activists called it a revolution. Critics grumbled about politicizing hospitality, but even they could not look away. Within a week, other hotel chains announced diversity reviews, scrambling not to be left behind. A month later, Ebony was invited to testify before Congress about racial equity in American business. She arrived in the same plain black dress she wore that day in Laguna Beach. This isn't about image, she told lawmakers. It's about power, and power must change hands. The equality mandate spread. Carter Resorts became the first in the industry to require transparency reports, to elevate workers from the laundry to the boardroom, to hand real authority to the very people once dismissed as just staff. Guests of color once wary now booked Carter Resorts not only for luxury but for dignity. The industry scoffed at first, then they followed. At Laguna Beach, Elena Smith was no longer trembling. She was now general manager, her leadership grounded not in fear of losing her job, but in certainty that telling the truth mattered. Behind her desk hung a plaque. Hospitality without equality is not hospitality. Guests stopped to read it. Some nodded, some frowned, but none could escape it. Months later, Ebony stood again in that same lobby, this time addressing staff from across the country. She looked out at a sea of faces, black, brown, white, Asian, each wearing the same uniform, but no longer carrying the same weight of silence. My mother once cleaned floors like these, she said softly, voice trembling but resolute. She was told we would never rise above it. Today, because of her and because of you, we have risen, not to mimic the old world, but to build a new one. The applause that followed was not polite nor hesitant. It was thunderous, unrestrained, history echoing in every clap. Ebony Carter was no longer just a CEO. She was a reformer, a builder, a symbol that in America, dignity could not be denied forever. And in that marble lobby, once a stage for humiliation, she left a truth carved deeper than any chandelier could shine. People of color are not guests at equality's table. We are its hosts. The Pacific roared against the cliffs as if it knew history had been rewritten on its shore. The Laguna Resort gleamed behind her, but Ebony Carter stood facing the ocean, her back to chandeliers and marble, her eyes on the horizon where fire and water collided. She did not need the lobby tonight. She needed the tide, the eternal witness. She drew a breath, deep as memory, heavy as truth. I was 9 years old when I first heard the sentence meant to chain me. Her voice carried across the night air. Your family will never be more than cleaners. Those words did not break me. They built me. For every step I took after, I carried that insult as fuel. Guests and staff gathered quietly on the balcony behind her, drawn not by command but by gravity, phones lowered, heads lifted. The CEO, who had once been mistaken for a trespasser, now stood like a general before her army, not of conquest but of justice. For decades, she continued, this country has opened doors with one hand and slammed them shut with the other. Black mothers scrubbed floors in hotels they could never afford to sleep in. Black fathers carried luggage for men who looked through them as if they were invisible. And children like me, we were told to know our place. Her voice rose, no longer soft, but ringing like steel. Tonight I say to America, our place is everywhere. In the lobby, at the front desk, in the penthouse suite, at the head of the boardroom table. We are not shadows in your hallways. We are the architects of the hall itself. And we will no longer bow our heads where we belong, standing tall. The crowd erupted, but Ebony lifted her hand, calling for silence, not to diminish them, but to raise them higher. This is not vengeance, she said. It is vindication. This is not about humiliating those who scorned us. It is about showing the world that dignity denied is dignity doubled when reclaimed. What you witnessed in that lobby was not a woman seizing power. It was a people refusing to kneel. Behind her, Elena Smith felt tears sting her eyes. A concierge yesterday, a manager today, a symbol tomorrow. Ebony's words wrapped her like armor. Ebony turned to face the people now, her silhouette framed by ocean and fire. From Selma to Montgomery, from Memphis to Ferguson, from Harlem to Atlanta, we have marched, we have sung, we have prayed, and still too often we were told, wait your turn. Tonight, I declare the waiting is over. We are here. We lead. We belong. Not as guests, not as employees, but as owners of our destiny. The older man who had spoken in the lobby earlier now bowed his head and whispered, this is our new hymn. The applause swelled, not in bursts, but in waves, as if the crowd itself had become the tie. Some clapped with fists high, others with tears streaming down their faces. Even those who had once whispered doubt found themselves moved, as though a door long locked inside their own hearts had been forced open. Ebony pressed on, her words rolling like thunder across the marble and glass. They told me once a black girl could never build this. Yet here I stand, at the helm of a chain that stretches across America's most beautiful shores. But let me tell you the truth. I did not build this alone. My mother's hands, cracked from bleach, built it. My community's prayers, unheard by boardrooms, built it. Every injustice I carried like stone upon stone, built it. And tonight, I return it not to myself, but to us. She spread her arms, and for a moment the crowd swore, the ocean hushed to listen. Let the world remember, she declared, voice resonant with both fury and grace, that the color of your skin does not determine the height of your crown, that the weight of your uniform does not define the worth of your soul, that a lobby is not truly grand unless every footstep echoes with belonging, and that justice, true justice, is not granted, it is claimed. The applause broke like thunder now, shaking glass, rattling chandeliers. Guests raised their phones again, but no longer to gawk, no longer to sneer. They filmed as witnesses to pass down to their children, to say they had seen the night dignity became law. And then, quieter, softer, Ebony gave them her final vow. I was once a child turned away from a lobby. Tonight, I am the woman who holds the keys, and I will not close these doors ever again, not for race, not for class, not for prejudice. These doors remain open for everyone who was told they did not belong. The crowd rose to its feet. Strangers embraced. Workers who had cleaned in silence for years wiped their faces openly, unashamed. Elena whispered, "It's done." But Ebony knew better. She turned once more to the ocean, her voice a promise to the tide itself. "It is not done. It has begun." The waves answered, roaring against the cliffs like a drumbeat. Not of mourning, of triumph, of arrival. And so the night ended not as an ending at all, but as a song, a new anthem etched into the stones of the resort, into the screams of millions, into the bones of a nation still learning to rise. Ebony Carter did not simply reclaim her lobby. She reclaimed America's conscience, and she left it with a truth no prejudice could erase. People of color do not wait for permission to belong. We belong. We endure. We lead. And we will always stand with heads held high, as free and as proud as anyone beneath this sky. The Pacific roared again, and the world finally listened. In the end, this was never just a story about a resort or a lobby. It was about dignity, how easily it can be stripped away with a single glance, a single word, and how powerful it becomes when reclaimed. A black woman at 52 walked into a place she already owned, and still the world tried to cast her out. Yet she stood, she endured, and she turned humiliation into transformation. That is the lesson. The true measure of a person is not written in the color of their skin, the clothes they wear, or the assumptions others place upon them. It is revealed in the courage to remain standing when others want you on your knees. So I ask you now, what would you have done if you were there, if you had seen it with your own eyes? Would you have spoken up? Would you have stood beside her? Let us know in the comments below. Share your truth, because silence has never changed, the world voices have. If this story moved you, if it stirred something deep within you, subscribe to our channel, share the video with someone who needs to hear it, and explore the other stories we tell. Each one carries lessons, reminders, and the kind of hope we cannot afford to lose. Thank you for watching, for staying until the very end. May this story travel with you into your own life, guiding your choices, shaping your courage, reminding you that justice is not distant, it is alive in how we treat one another. Wishing you a day filled with dignity, with kindness, and with the unshakable truth that we all belong.